Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you and your families are doing well and in good health and restarting tourism in your respective countries. I have the pleasure to welcome you all in our webinar covering the deep impact of COVID-19 on tourism from a statistical perspective. The enormous impact of COVID-19 on international tourism has now become clear that, with UNWTO data that we have until the month of May, showing in the latest edition of UNWTO World Tourism Barometer shows that the near complete lockdown imposed in response to the pandemic led to a 98% fall in international tourism numbers when compared to the same period in 2019. The barometer also shows a 56% year-on-year drop in tourist arrivals between January and May. This translates into a fall of 300 million tourists and 320 billion US dollars loss in international tourism receipts, which is which is 3 times more than the loss during the global economic crisis of 2009. While tourism is slowly returning in some destinations, the UNWTO Confidence Index has dropped to record lows, both for evaluation of the period from January to April 2020 and the prospects for the period from May to August. Most members of the UNWTO panel of tourism experts expect international tourism to recover by the second half of 2021, followed by those who expect a rebound in the first part of next year. As our Secretary General, Mr. Zurab Polonikashvili, said, the latest data makes clear that of the importance of restarting tourism as soon as it's safe to do so. The dramatic fall in international tourism places many millions of livelihoods at risk, including in developing countries. Governments in every region have a dual responsibility to prioritize public health while also protecting jobs and businesses. They also need to maintain the spirit of cooperation and solidarity that has defined our response to this shared challenge and refrain from making unilateral decisions that may undermine the trust and confidence we have been working so hard to build. Do we really know the effects that this situation is having on tourism in all destinations? Do we understand the effect that the reduction of tourism activity is having on economies, societies, and the environment? Certainly, there is data. There's data everywhere, but not at all of it is equally well placed to answer these questions, especially not when we wish to benchmark or gain trust. COVID-19 has also shown just how important sustainability is in a world where our economies, our societies, and our environment were more narrowly intertwined than ever. The spread and the effects of the virus rapidly became pervasive. Tourism is by definition embedded in our economies and in our societies. It relies on our environment when it can help protect or degrade. Today, our high-level experts will discuss these impacts of global pandemic, not only on tourism activity, but also on the nature of the statistical activities that are necessary to properly measure the main aspects of tourism at the national and international levels in the short, medium, and long term. And we have with us international, national, and regional experts in this webinar. I have the pleasure of welcoming my colleague, Mr. Ernan Epstein, Chief of Statistics in UNWTO, and our panelists, Mr. Adel Ezki, Director of Geographical, Environment, Tourism, and Energy Statistics Department in the GCC Stat, and Mr. Faisal Aslami from the Saudi Ministry of Tourism. Before I give the virtual floor to my colleague Ernan, I'd like to mention that my colleagues in charge of this platform will launch a poll of questions that you will see later on during this webinar. Ernan, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Basma. It's a pleasure to be here with such great experts and with your company as well. And it's good to say, I say good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Indeed, like Basma was saying, there's been a lot of discussions in terms of the impact of the COVID pandemic on tourism activity. But I think there hasn't been that much discussion on the impact of statistical activities and what is being requested from the statistical community in the long and short term in terms of what to deliver to policymakers, and also on our ability to deliver, on the ability of the statistical community to deliver on these issues. So I think that's what this webinar is about. I will make a short presentation, introductory presentation, and then I will pass the floor to the experts who are really the stars of the webinar. And they will give their perspective from a regional and national perspective. So I will now share my screen. Okay, this is roughly the outline of my presentation today. I will first talk about the impact of COVID-19 on tourism activity. Basma has mentioned some of this already, but I will go a little bit more in detail. I will then move on to the value of statistics, what statistics bring to the table in terms of organizing the whole volume of data that is around. I will then talk about the effects of COVID-19 on tourism statistics, so not on the tourism activity, but on tourism statistics per se. And I will also talk about an initiative within UNWTO or within the international tourism statistics activity community, which is the MST, the Measuring the Sustainability of Tourism Framework. So in terms of the impact on tourism activity, of course, one of the main reasons for this big impact that Basma already introduced on tourism activity is these travel restrictions that are a consequence of the dire health situation globally. Around April, I think mid-April already, the whole world all countries in the world and territories had taken some sort of travel restriction related to COVID. Now, some countries are starting to ease some of these restrictions. This map shows in green which countries have already started easing these restrictions. 40% of all destinations have done this. As you can see, most of them are mostly in the European region, which was one of the first ones, together with the Asia Pacific community, to be affected by the pandemic. 115 countries, so about 53% of all countries, continue to have completely closed borders, and 88 of these have had this for at least 12 weeks. So about 40% of all countries have had completely closed borders for about 12 weeks, so about 3 months so far, and some continue. So this, of course, heavily affects international tourism. And only 4 destinations have lifted all COVID-19 related restrictions. Now, this slide gives an idea of how these restrictions are taking place in different regions. In the Middle East, as you can see, the Middle East has been one of the first ones to react and one of the first regions to react, and one of the ones that have the more strict restrictions in terms of travel. 77% of destinations have a complete closure of borders as of July 19. And 15% have partial closure of borders. That means that in total, 92% have some sort of closure of borders. Now on to impact on tourism activity. How have these restrictions and the whole pandemic itself have affected international tourist arrivals? Basma already mentioned some of this. As she said, if you look at the data between January and May of 2020 and compare it to January and May of 2019, there's a decrease in the international tourist arrivals at the global level of 56%. The most affected regions are the Asian, the Pacific, and Europe. As per this data, of course, these are the ones that were more early on affected by the pandemic. So that's why, as we include data from June, July, probably we'll see other regions catching up to the Asian, the Pacific, and Europe. In the Middle East, this effect has been about 52%. So if we compare January and May of 2020 to the same period in 2019, there's been an increase of 52% in international tourism arrivals. This gives a little bit more of an idea of what's happening in the region. If you look at country level data, we can see these are the countries for which we have data. As you can see, January and February of 2020 were actually relatively good months, especially if you look at Oman and Qatar, for example, where there were big increases with respect to the 2019 January and February. Now, if we look at March, we already can see that there's starting to be a decrease, and in April, May, and even June in some cases, for Oman, for which we have data, there's pretty much a decrease of 100%. So there's been no tourist arrivals, virtually no tourist arrivals. So all this data that we presented is based on official statistics, official tourism statistics. So I would like to discuss a bit what the value of statistics can be in terms of, there's a lot of other kind of data around as well, which has been used and has been used to make predictions and to make estimates, which are very, very valuable as well. But statistics can also bring an extra value to this type of data. So what is the value of statistics? The value is that it collects data that serves a specific purpose. When a statistical collection activity is carried, such as a survey, for example, is designed in a way that it serves a specific purpose and that it's made for analysis. Now, this may not be the case with some big data, for example, sources, where it's a byproduct of other activities. Of course, it doesn't mean by any means that this data that big data is not useful. I'm not saying that, but it probably needs to be. It could potentially have some biases that need to be addressed, and statistics can help in addressing these types of biases. Statistics also provides a framework for the compilation and analysis of indicators. So it provides clear definitions. This is extremely important, especially in the verge of a situation like we're living today. For example, it's important to know what is comprised as tourism. For example, cases of hotels that have changed their economic activity completely and they're turned into areas for housing workers or for quarantine. Does this qualify as tourism or not? Well, this is something that needs to be defined and needs to be standard across all regions within a country and all countries around the world. This framework can also ensure spatial and temporal comparability. This is very important in the sense that we're measuring something in a standard way, in a comparable manner. And this is important, for example, within a country, if that all regions measure their indicators in the same way to feed policymaking, evidence for policymaking, and also across countries, of course. This framework can make sense. Statistics can also help make sense of alternative sources of data, like I mentioned before. Some big data sources can have some biases that could be addressed by the use of a framework such as statistical framework. Statistics also provide trust and objectivity to the indicators, and this is crucial for providing evidence, relevant evidence for policy making. So I'm going to focus on a few. There's many effects of the pandemic on statistics and on many other issues, but I'm going to focus on two only. One more in the short term, one more in the long term, or on the medium long term. The first one is the need for short-term data and statistics. Of course, there's been a huge need, and I think Mr. Faisal will talk about this, of the case in Saudi Arabia, a huge need for more up-to-date or almost real-time data for policy making and to react to the pandemic. For this, there needs to be a close collaboration, a close dialogue between users and producers. There needs to be, from users, it needs to be clear what is needed from the policy side, and from producers, it needs to be clear what is possible. Some traditional sources have also been very heavily affected. I will talk about this in the next slide a little bit more in detail, but it's clear that the pandemic and social distancing can affect, for example, carrying of surveys. Surveys now, if their surveys are face-to-face, they cannot be carried anymore in many cases. There's also the need to incorporate alternative sources, such as big data through innovation, like I mentioned before, and the need to use statistics to make sense of this data. Many countries have used, for example, TSA as a framework to estimate the economic impact on the tourism activity of the pandemic. So again, on the impact on statistical activities, UNWTO did a survey on countries, asking them how the pandemic had affected surveys. The main types of sources that are used traditionally in tourism statistics is our surveys and administrative sources. The results are here on the screen. As you can see, border surveys, of course, have suffered the most. With borders closing, many border surveys had to be canceled or postponed. About 70% of countries said they were canceled or postponed, and about 90% they said they were affected at some level or canceled or postponed. Accommodation and household surveys also were affected, not as much as the border surveys, because there are ways to get information from hotels or from households that don't need to be on the face-to-face way. But they were also affected. For example, about 80% were either affected or canceled or postponed for both of these sources. Now, if you look at administrative sources, these have not been affected so much. And this is, of course, because there's not a collection that is done from, the collection is done in an automatic manner. So only about 6-7% of these sources had to be canceled or postponed, and only about 80% were affected. And actually, sorry, only 20% were affected at some point. And actually, about 20% of countries reported that they used administrative sources to complement other sources, such as surveys, that were being more heavily affected before. We've also asked them what kind of other sources they had used to complement other data, other sources that have been affected. And some of these are related to these alternative sources that I mentioned before. Of course, it can be very important sources for complementing the statistical data, the statistical sources. Mobile data, road transport data, flight supply data, search trends on internet engines. Bank cards have been also used, and in some cases, countries have explored ways of making their own estimates as well. The second impact, that's one of the first impact that I wanted to mention, more on the short term, let's say, and this one's be more on the medium and long term. There's been, of course, a lot of discussions about restarting tourism from a more sustainable perspective, and we're putting sustainability at the core of this restart. And I think this is also very, very important. I put a few cases here from, for example, at the cases at the media or on the internet. One of the cases at the destination level on Venice, one on the media on BBC, one from academia. and one from the international community, in this case from WTO as well. So it's clear that sustainability is now at the core of this restart. So with this also comes a stronger need to measure the sustainability of tourism as well. There's been in some discussions also some sort of false dichotomy where there was either or in terms of focusing on economic growth or sustainability, that these two had to be exclusive, but I don't think this is the case. I think also have been agreed in many fora that this is not the case, that it can be both happening at the same time. It can be economic growth and sustainability in the tourism sector. Also, crises are a sustainability issue per se. I mean, how the sector reacts to external shocks, such as the current pandemic, talk about how sustainable the tourism sector is in itself. And there's also a need to measure different dimensions of sustainability, so the economic, environmental, and social dimensions. So far, most of the analysis has been focused mostly on the economic perspective, and I think the reason for this may be because there's more data from the economic perspective. There's international frameworks such as the tourism satellite accounts that allow a standard and comparable manner of measuring the economic dimension of tourism. Now, for environmental and social, it's not so much the case. And this is when the MST that I mentioned before comes in. The MST is a statistical framework that includes, this quote up there is from the Manila Call for Action. It says, "We unite political commitment and technical expertise to call for the development and implementation of a statistical framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism that includes economic, environmental, and social dimensions across relevant spatial scales, which are global, national, and subnational." So the MST framework can fill both these needs of measuring the three dimensions and also at the different spatial scales, not only at the national level, but also the subnational level and at the destination level. Currently, there are standards or frameworks, international recognized frameworks for measuring the economic and environmental dimension. These are the System of National Accounts, SNA, and the System of Environmental and Economic Accounting, which is SIA. For the social dimension, this is a bit more challenging, but there are some tools that can be used, such as sets of indicators, human capital, and social capital. If we look at tourism, the TSA already measures the contribution of tourism from the economic dimension, from the economic perspective. Now, what the MST, that framework does is it fills this niche, this need for measuring economic, environmental, and social dimension of tourism in a similar manner that the TSA does it for the economic dimension. So the statistical framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism aims to become the third international standard on tourism. The first two were the International Recommendation for Tourism Statistics and the Tourism Satellite Accounts. It is recognized by the UN to measure the contribution of tourism to the SDG agenda. It measures all the way to the subnational level, as I mentioned before, and it assesses the impact of crisis. It can help assess the impact of crisis also on the three dimensions, not only on economic growth. To give some idea of what kind of indicators can be found within the MST, or what kind of aspects are measured within the MST framework. In economic, you can see a list here. You can see a list on the three dimensions. In the economic side, mostly are coming, of course, from TSA. On the environmental side, SIA has been adapted and is linked also to TSA to come up with some specific aspects of tourism. So water use in tourism industries, energy use, GHG emissions, solid waste, and other ones as well. On the social side, there's also a number of aspects that need to be measured. I think in the context of a COVID pandemic, the health outcomes is also a very important issue. The community, how it affects the community, decent work, etc. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the governance of the MST. This is not an initiative from UNWTO alone. There's a working group of experts on MST which is comprised of 24 different countries, 3 from the Middle East region, and also a number of international organizations. And this working group is in charge of developing the framework and many other related activities as well, such as, for example, developing an implementation roadmap. This working group reports to the Committee on Statistics of UNWTO. In the implementation side, there's been already a number of pilot studies. The countries are here, as you can see. Saudi Arabia is in there as well, and Mr. Faisal will today talk about their experience of Saudi Arabia in the MST pilot. There's also other activities such as capacity building through, for example, regional workshops. We already conducted last year our first workshop with UNESCAP, jointly with UNESCAP in the Asia Pacific region, and also technical cooperation directly at the country level to implement the MST. So, with no further ado, I would like now to pass it on to the experts. We have Ms. Suad Said Al-Aliski, who is from the Statistical Center of GCC. So she will provide a regional perspective of what's been happening in the Middle East and what initiatives that have been within the Middle East to fight the pandemic from a statistical point of view. And then Mr. Faisal Al-Salimi will speak from the Ministry of Tourism of Saudi Arabia on the impact of the pandemic in the country, and also on the MST pilot, like I mentioned before. So I'll pass it on now to Ms. Suad.
Yes, thank you, Hernan. Thank you, Basma, for welcoming us. Good morning, everybody. I'll share my presentation first. Okay, it is my pleasure to participate in this webinar and to give an idea about how the pandemic affects GCC countries and the tourism statistics. My presentation will cover these points as it shows in this slide about the impact on global and GCC economy, GCC status according to the international organization, and general impacts of pandemic measures on tourism in GCC countries, direct impact of the pandemic of tourism statistics in the countries during the crisis. As everyone knows that the global economy has been affected by the pandemic in 2020, and according to the data published by the IMF, that the economy will decrease by almost 5% in 2020, and all the economic activities which is related to travel and tourism will be among the most affected sectors, as the borders are closed and aircraft stop flying, hotels closed, and also travel restriction imposed. They also expected that the recovery will begin gradually in 2021. By the end of the third quarter of 2021, and it will reach about 5.4%. About GCC countries, and according to the estimates that has done by our expert in GCC stats, also it is expected that the GCC economy will decrease by 3 to 6% in 2020. And as you see in this chart, the economic activities which is related to tourism and travel and tourism are decreased by 16% for accommodation and food service, 12% for transportation and storage, and 8% for entertainment, and so on. In this slide and the other coming slides, I would like to provide an idea or an overview about how the international organization reports about Middle East and GCC in their indicators. And as Hernan mentioned in his presentation, that international tourist arrival decreased by 52% in the Middle East, and that include also GCC countries. I will not go deep in this slide because Hernan already covered this. So according to the WTTC data, they expected that the contribution of the travel and tourism GDP in Middle East will decrease in 2020 through three scenarios. As a best case scenario, it will decrease by 40%. And as a worst case scenario, it will decrease by 73%. And if we assume that GCC countries will decrease with the same percent, that's mean that contribution of travel and tourism GDP in GCC countries will decrease in a best case scenario by 63 billion US dollar in 2020, and as a worst case scenario, it will decrease by 115 billion US dollar, where the total travel and tourism GDP in GCC countries is about 158 billion in 2019. Also about the contribution of travel and tourism to employment in GCC countries, in 2019, it was about 2.9 million jobs, which is about 10.6% of the total employment. Also, the WTTC expected that the travel and tourism jobs in Middle East will decrease in 2020 through the three scenarios. As a best case scenario, it will decrease by 41%, and as a worst case scenario, it will decrease by 73%. The assumption for GCC countries, as a best case scenario, it will decrease by 1.2 million jobs, and as a worst case, it will decrease by 2.1 jobs. The same things with the number of international visitors. Also, it is expected that it will decrease in 2020 as it shows in this table. And this will affect the international visitor spends. As it is in 2019, the international visitor spends in GCC is about 40.9 billion. Another example about GCC status according to international organization is what the International Civil Aviation Organization finds in or what they published is there is a decrease in the average daily number of departure flights in GCC by 93.1% in the quarter 2 of 2020 comparing to the quarter 1 of 2020. Now, based on this issue, we have two levels of measures in the region. Level that have been started or that have been taken in the beginning of the pandemic to avoid the spread of the virus and to protect the life of people. The precautionary measures, in these measures, countries went into full lockdown and shutting down airports, imposing travel restriction, and also completely sealing the borders. And these things lead to a closure of tourism activities and also to a changing in the activities of some hotels to the health activities. also, these things leads to a statistical deficiencies, which I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. The other level of measures is what we call it recovery measures. This measure started in the beginning of June, where the recovery began slowly through facilitating the traveling and movement with special protocols. Also by opening airports and borders gradually. These things leads to opening some tourism activities and also opening supportive and tourism services establishment. And now these things leads to helps NSOs and GCC stat to activating the data production cycle. Now this is about the direct impact of pandemic on tourism statistics in GCC countries. And as an outcomes of these pandemic, here are the direct impacts that we have it now, and that what we have deal with it. And we have about the statistical data, there is a lack of statistical data from flow from original data sources to NSOs. And due to the closing of the airports and borders, and also many tourism activities stopped or changed, we are not having all the statistical data that we need from the NSOs, because they are not able also to collect the data from the original sources. And that case push us to think about new or non-traditional data sources to produce some statistics on tourism by cooperating with the regional and international entities to come over the lake of data. Also, we have a timeliness, which is a delay in the data cycle, because as everyone know, for 2 months, most of institutions are not participate their work in the ground. And this lead to the case where the data is not coming on time. The delay on producing data from the original source lead to delay to provide the NSOs with the data that we need. And also these things will affect also the NSOs programs and agendas, and they cannot align their agenda with GCC stat agenda. Also, we have quality, because we have now different sources of the data. We have a lot of question regarding the quality of data, because we want to make sure about what we publish. We want to make sure it is correct. Also, we have consistency, which means the different time and different time references. So due to the crisis, some hotels stop working partially or completely, and some hotels' activities has been changed to a medical services. And this caused a problem with the NSOs, or with the to how calculate the data, or how to collect these data regarding to hotel indicators. To overcome with this issue or challenges, some countries, they start to activate the electronic links or system between them and the hotels. And also in some countries, they start to generate monthly data because they used to work with annual data. And now they see it is important to start with monthly data so they can measure the impact of the COVID-19. Also, many countries, they start to prepare a recovery plan. As a GCC stat, our role is to providing a technical support to the 6 countries. Also, to prepare some statistical reports on the impact of the pandemic on tourism sector, and also to coordinating with the international organization about how to measure the impact of this pandemic. And this is what I have today this is what I have to present today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suad. It's good to see. Well, it's not good, but it's interesting to see that the same impacts that we found at the global level are also found within the Middle Eastern region as well. Yeah. So this is definitely consistent, and it seems that there are the same issues that we've been discussing. You also see that there are some room for opportunities in this crisis for expanding the statistical system, having monthly data, as you mentioned, the use of electronic transfer of data. This is things that definitely improve the timeliness and quality of data, and that they come up as a main need now because of the pandemic. So thank you very much for that. I will now pass it on to Mr. Faisal then to talk about the experience more at the national level within Saudi Arabia. Mr. Faisal, the floor is all yours.
Hi, good afternoon and good evening. I'm Faisal Sarimi from Ministry of Tourism, Saudi Arabia. I'm going to present the pilot studies that done by Saudi Arabia regarding the experience for how to measure the environmental effect of tourism. Actually, the main objective of this study is to answer our questions that it's raised. How can country estimate environmental effect of tourism based on tourism satellite account TSA, while the countries, they don't have a system of environmental and economic account. So this is the account, it's not applied in Saudi Arabia yet, the SIA 2012. So we put the heavy weight on the tourism satellite account, and I'm gonna present to you the experience that we did it in these 2 pilot studies. I'm gonna share the desktop. Is it there? Yeah. So there is let's first start talking about the COVID impact on the tourism in Saudi Arabia, which is impact on the economic side, environmental side, and even in the social side. As you know, the tourism is the most affected sector by the COVID pandemic. And when it started, the researchers searched for the data that would help the leaders and decision makers for their decision. The issue, the survey or the field work for the surveys about the domestic, international visitor survey or tourism establishment or accommodation, it's stopped because of the what you call it, the lockdown of the movement of the people. So the dramatic decrease in the tourists, either domestic or inbound, because of the lockdown of the borders and the movement on the city itself, there, what we call there is an improved, because of that lockdown, there is an improved of the air quality on the city and in the tourism destination. Also, there is a decrease on the consumption of accommodation facility, and that decrease in the consumption of the accommodation, it's reflected on the consumption of water, energy, fuel, and wastewater and disposable. So Saudi Arabia, while these what happened in the market or around us, so Saudi Arabia started considerable the work of evaluating of non-traditional data, not there is no survey or field work. So we go to a record and we try to utilize the big data that we have it either from the telecommunication side, aviation side, border side, electricity, electricity and water, a lot of what you call a producer of the data. So therefore there is a decision was issued by His Royal Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to create a semi-live dashboard that adopting the big data, and it gives you a semi-live dashboard that utilize these producer of these data. And the good thing that it was done by end of March 2020, we finished from this dashboard by connecting we put a data warehouse and we connecting all the wires, let's say from the borders and aviation and telecommunication and even the banks, not just only credit card, even the data of the bank, the point of sales, the cash withdrawal and transfer, a lot of indicators. It's more than 70 indicators that till now that we use it. It's more than that. So this is the one lesson from COVID that it move us to the big data. So and also there is a study that I read it about from University of Sydney, which is published in +1 international scientific journal, that it shows the consumption, the fall down of the consumption and the income from wage and salary, around 6% the fall down, because of the 4% of the global workforce that it go down. So the relative between the jobs and wages or remuneration, let's say. Also, the good thing about the environment dimension from sustainability, it's the greenhouse gas emission, which is fall down around 4.6% as per the University of Sydney study, which is larger than any drop in human history. And also the fine particulate matter that it fall down around 3.8%. Even the sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and also the burning of fossil fuels, which is because of the industry. They stop down the production of their factories, and a lot of industry that stopped working. So the consuming of the fuel or the petrol, it was go down. And that's why some of the countries, they're using the fossil fuels, which is linked to the asthma and chest tightness and even the emission from nitrogen oxide from fuel combustion, let's say for driving the cars. And this is one of the study, the pilot study that we did it on the domestic, that I'm going to show it to you right now. So as these factors that around us and the pressure of the environmental pressure on the tourism, on the destination level even, so that we're considering to try to measure and to quantify or understand those pressure. Ministry of Tourism, they did a lot of efforts for adoption and ethical method based on tourism satellite account, because UNWTO, they put a huge effort for the statistical framework for tourism satellite account, and even now they are working on the compilation guide. So we try to use these efforts from UNWTO and reflect it on our tourism statistic. So the first, or let me talk about even the international recommendation and tourism satellite account. This is these two manual, let's say, for tourism statistic and the accounting of the tourism in the country or even in the region or destination. So I recommend all the countries that they have to follow these two manual and to utilize the years of effort from UNWTO to gather and publish these two manual, internationally manual. Now I'm going to the first pilot study that had been done in 2017 in Manila, for which is at that time the first year of the sustainable tourism. So the first pilot study, we talk about the environmental measures for tourism commercial accommodation service. This pilot study, we concentrate only on hotel and furnished apartments, which is the commercial side, and we make it as, let's say, 3 levels. The first thing is the data source. We use the accommodation survey that already has been done by Ministry of Tourism, and also the tourism establishment survey data that done by Ministry of Tourism, and even inbound and domestic tourism survey regarding the visitor and the length of stay. And we use also the secondary data from Ministry of Environment and Water and Agriculture and Saudi Electricity Company. The methodology that we use for the first pilot, we identified just only 2 main commercial accommodation, which is at that time, these just only what we have, because now it's totally different. It's more than that. At that time, 2007, just only we have the commercial, the hotels and furnished apartments. And we determine the guest number from the accommodation survey, as well as the guest night, even from the survey. And we determine also the intermediate consumption on fuel, electricity, and water from the tourism establishment survey, which is a yearly survey. We converting the monetary intermediate consumption, the energy and water, into quantities and flow to reflect it on the inbound and domestic tourism survey, and we use it with the conversion on the secondary data. So we're calculating the consumption of energy and water by domestic and inbound tourists from in the commercial accommodation service. And this pilot study is already there on the MST for UNWTO website. You can find this pilot study there with the details, the figure, the formula, and this stuff. The second pilot study that we did it in 2018, it's we tried to get the gas emissions, the CO2 from domestic tourism who use land transportation between the provinces or the regions in Saudi Arabia. Also for this one, the data source for that domestic tourism survey, the tourists who use land transportation between the city, and also General Authority for Statistics, which is the National Statistic Office in Saudi Arabia. And we use secondary data from Ministry of Transport, Saudi Standards and Metrology and Quality Organization. The methodology for this pilot study that we determined the distance between the provinces or the regions, let's say region A and region B, the distance, how many, 100, 300, 400 kilometers. So we determine this distance. Then we calculate the number of travel party who use land. So the tourist trip plus the day trip, which the name and international recommendations to the visitor from domestic survey. We calculate how many number of travel party inside this trip. Then we defining the conversion factor for converting the distance from kilometer to fuel quantities liter. And this kind of, or the formula that we use it from the average consumption of the fuel liter per kilometer. Then we estimated domestic tourism consumption of the fuel in land transportation. Then we get the CO2, how many tons in the air it's produced by domestic visitor from this destination to that destination. Now I'm going to talk about the whole picture. These two pilot studies cover the environmental dimension. Now I'm going to talk about measuring the sustainability of the tourism in Saudi Arabia. As you know, the sustainability of tourism provides indicator about the economic, social, environmental aspect or dimension of the tourism. So we have the data that it covers the demand survey, which is the domestic, outbound, inbound, and we have from the supply data, which cover the tourism establishment, accommodation. And when we did this pilot study, and when we did also the tourism satellite account, we have covered already around 60% of the key statistical domain of the MST. And I'm going to show you a small table now regarding the situation in MST in Saudi Arabia. This small table, it represents you what we have from the statistical dimension or the statistical domain from MST and what we don't have. The visitor movement that is available in Saudi Arabia, tourism activity and expenditure, this is already from the demand side, it's available there. Tourism characteristic industry, it's also there. We have this data. Tourism employment also available. The environmental flow, these pilot study that we present, because we don't have a system of environment and economic account 2012 applied in Saudi Arabia. So we did this pilot study based on tourism satellite account. The environmental assets and expenditure and environmental protection, it's not available on our domains or the data. But what we did on this dashboard that we using the big data, we tried now to gather all these statistical domain, and also we'll do more than these domains also. Regarding even the tourism infrastructure and tourism gross fixed capital formation, that it's partially available. If I'm talking about tourism satellite account table number 8, and we did it as a pilot in 2010, around 2010 that we did it as a pilot. Spatial measurement issues, also it's partially available from the tourism flow of seasonality. So the conclusion of these two pilot studies and the effort before these two pilot studies, the approach adopted in the case allows us to partially examine some environmental, because that's only we cover the water, fuel, energy, and the gas emission, just only these four, but the environmental is more than these. And also the TSA is still the cornerstone on the comprehensive statistical measurement of the tourism. It is should be all the country that they try to do an effort to applying the TSA, because if they applying the TSA in their country, that means that they will cover around 50% of the statistical domains for MST. And also, we didn't just only focus on TSA and MST without looking to other efforts from the either United Nations or either from MST itself for SDGs. So these two pilot studies has the synergic with the United Nations for the SDGs, statistical Sustainable Development Goals 2030. In particular, of our outcome of this pilot study could help partially in providing relevant for the goals number 8 and number 12 and number 14 out of 17 goals. And the main lesson that we learn from these pilot projects, that the TSA is essential for developing any other tourism accounting framework. Again, I repeat so many times TSA, because really it is, let's say, 60% of the solution for the MST or even the SDGs. And in Saudi Arabia, let's go back about the pandemic and the environmental and the decrease in the domestic tourism. The good thing that Saudi Arabia started the summer season with break-free, which is the Saudi summer that for it showed the tourist destination in Saudi Arabia, which is cover the historical side, natural side, and even the culture treasure that. And now even within these days, this season introduced the first leisure cruise offering in Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea for luxury cruise. And from this season, we didn't expect that much. Actually, we thought we are underestimate of the data from these domestic tourism on the, let's say, on the south of Saudi Arabia or in the Red Sea itself. We reach 90% in commercial accommodation, the occupancy rate, which is very huge compared to even the last year without the pandemic. It's normal because there is no international travel. There is the flight, it's not yet open because of all they are domestic, but the pressure on the commercial accommodation, it is high. And this season or Saudi summer season, this started from 25th of June, and it will by end of 30 September. And I hope I didn't take the long time for this presentation. And thank you so much. And the floor for you, Hernan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faisal. You did not take too long. It's always nice to see when it's so interesting. Time flies by very, very quickly. So I just wanted to thanks a lot for the presentation. I think I just wanted to underline I think there are two key messages that you mentioned, which I think are very important. One is the effort that the country needs to do to involve all potential sources of statistics. I think when you mentioned the MST experience, you talked about the Ministry of Environment, you talked about the electricity company, Ministry of Transport, the meteorology, I think as well, of course, GA Stats. This is a huge effort in putting all these institutions together and to work together towards a goal. So I think this is very important in general in the statistical system, the tourism statistics system. You also had a similar experience, I guess, with the big data, where you had to bring data sources from all different sectors. And the second point also that you mentioned several times, and I think it's very important, it's how you didn't need to have the SIA in order to measure the environmental side. This is something very important, I think, as well. You need to have a fully developed system in order to implement an MST, because the MST is a modular approach. You can focus on one dimension, you can focus on the other, you can focus on different aspects. Of course, it always helps to have SIA or to have TSA as well. It's super important. But I mean, it's something that one can focus on different aspects and then build on a bigger system. So I think I know we have a question from a person, from somebody, from Mr. Taleb Rifai. This is a very, very, very special name for us at UNWTO. He used to be the Secretary General here. So if it was, I'm not sure if it's the same person, but if it is, it's a pleasure to have him here. He asked, how can stats be so low on reliability and admin data so reliable? I think this is related to my presentation where I show the results. In this case, what I wanted to underline is that indeed, statistical sources such as surveys are very, very reliable. But during the pandemic, they had to be canceled in many cases, like also was mentioned by Ms. Suad and Mr. Faisal. Some of these surveys, for example, are collected on a face-to-face basis. This, of course, is not available, not possible anymore in a situation where there's a pandemic. Some cases, some countries had to change, move it to, say, telephone data collection or to web data collection. These are also very good initiatives to be able to still collect the data. But it's true that this kind of data is more affected than, for example, administrative data, which in which data is transferred in an automatic electronic manner in most cases. So I wanted to address, that's one of the questions we had from the audience. And then I also wanted to look at the results from the poll. We had a poll, there was a question that was asked to all participants, and it's been closed now. The question was, how do you think COVID-19 has influenced the level of priority given to developing tourism data for more sustainable tourism policy? So whether the pandemic has had what impact it's had on the priority level of of measuring the sustainability of tourism and what data for sustainable tourism. The options were, it is more important now, it is less important, or it has the same level. The responses say that 84% of participants, of respondents, said that it is more important now. About 5% said it is less important now, and about 15% that said that the level remains unchanged. I think this is also the way we see it. I mean, at least the way in the long term, how this would probably be. because of the importance of sustainability and sustainable tourism as we build back. I wanted to show also, because we did this question also to all pilot studies that we had. We had 8 responses in total, and I wanted to share the results that we got from the pilot studies, from the countries that conducted MST pilots. So I'll go to share screen. Okay, so there you can see we had 8 replies from all the pilot studies, and 2 said it was less important now, 3 said it wasn't changed, and 3 said it was more important. So clearly the vision from the participants was different on what happened in some cases in the country, because we had, this is a very small sample, but we had already 2 that said that it was less important and 3 that said it wasn't changed. And I think this has to do with the fact that in a case like this, in the short term, there are many other priorities that come up, such as, for example, Mr. Faisal mentioned about improving the timeliness of the data, and accessing other new sources that make it possible to improve the timeliness. But in the long run, I think this is something that is going to be very important, and in the medium and long term, it's going to be something that is very important. And I think that was also the difference maybe in the question, that in this case, it was more countries replied mostly from a short-term perspective, let's say, and participants probably more from a medium-term perspective. I don't know if our panelists, if Ms. Suad or Mr. Faisal have anything to comment on these results from the poll.
Yes, Ernan, I do agree that it is more important now, because I think that the tourism sector is not an independent sector. It is across all the economic activities, and it is also contributing in the country's economy. So I think it's a good time now to transform from the current method to the modern methods. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ward.
Yeah, and just I want to add, I totally agree with you, Hernan, Suad, regarding the importance of even the what you call it, to change the policy now comparing to the previous, because the current situation. I try to, let's say, the mention of the effort, the initiative that was issued from Saudi Arabia regarding of this pandemic, either from the financial initiative. It's designed to support the private sector, which is the tourism. It's one part of this industry, and the tourism industry, they have the employment. Behind the employee, there is a family. There is it's like a chain. So Saudi Arabia, they took a lot of initiatives, a financial initiative, let's say, for supporting the Saudi national work and private sector in the total, but the tourism, one of them, suspending the collection of fines and financial penalties, even postponing the payment of the value added, the tax acceleration, even the VAT, postponing the collection of custom duties on import on this situation. So there is a policy, it will gonna change because of this pandemic. This pandemic give us a huge lesson. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much both for your very insightful comments on this. Indeed, the pandemic has shaken not only the tourism community but also the world, and I think it's time probably to reevaluate what priorities there are in our case from a statistical perspective. So in this case, you already mentioned a few of these things, but I don't know if you want to touch upon other priorities and that we should look into looking forward in the short and in the long term. I mean, on top of what you already mentioned, if there's anything else you want to mention in that regard to both Mr. Faisal and Ms. Suad. Or not. if you want to mention something, otherwise, but maybe it's from a regional perspective or from a country perspective. For example, in this sense, it would be interesting to know what kind of requests in general. I mean, from Saudi Arabia, I understand there was a big request for real-time data, for data that is more timely. I was wondering if maybe Ms. Suad will have an insight into what other requests there were from other countries in the region, or if there are also other requests from the policy side to the statistical side that were in Saudi Arabia as well. If Mr. Faisal also wants to comment on that.
Just gonna add, Hernan, regarding, I wanted to concentrate on the governance and the coordination, either from this pandemic. We need the coordination between the stakeholders or the producer of these data to get a lot of information, to get to understand the real picture of and it should be let's say a change in the policy to cope with this pandemic. I'm gonna mention one of the efforts that Ministry of the Tourism did it regarding using or utilizing the big data and building the big data. It's not general big data, it's tourism big data that we built it in March 2020. That there is a committee, it's called Tourism Statistical Data Committee for measuring the sustainable of the tourism, even for these kind of data. So this effort, from His Royal Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he feels the need of the data in real time. So that's why the effort is coming from the top, and the supervision on this committee, it's from the top. So this is the good thing, and we, alhamdulillah, we thank God about this powerful of this committee for the big data and the indicators to be alive data. Sorry, it takes time.
No, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Faisal. No, it's great to see the efforts that are being done in Saudi Arabia in terms of putting data at the forefront and making it a tool for policymaking and for evidence-based policymaking. This is what I think all countries should aim for in the end, to have a strong statistical system that allows for to feed the policy side to make evidence-based policy making. In terms of, I have also a question for both of you. In terms of what you think are the main challenges in, for example, providing tourism policymakers with this up-to-date information, this almost near real-time data. What do you think are the main challenges in fulfilling that need from the policymakers, both at the regional and at the national level?
At the regional level, I think the main challenge is the lack of data. And if we want to forecast the data, also I think there is lack of approved methodologies for tourism forecasting, and also there is different time lags between administrative data sets for tourism measurement. This is what I think is the main challenges as a regional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Suad. Indeed, the time lags can be a big issue in this, definitely. Mr. Faisal, I don't know if you have anything to add as well.
Either I want to add, also I want to add one important thing, the cooperation, or we have to start, let's say, a committee between the producer of the data. And this is, it's not something impossible. If you have this committee and you have all the producer and the data in one room, and you agree on set of data, set of connection, integration between these entities into one data warehouse, you will get a treasure from data. It will be a valuable information for that. So the committee, the agreement, and why I'm speaking about this, because this is already, we did it. So alhamdulillah, this is, we gather all the more than 13 entities from border, from aviation, from telecommunication, from banks, from employment, from the insurance, social insurance. We gather them, they are in one room. And we already start the integration. We gather the data manually first, then we start the integration using API and other technical. So the solution is to start committee with these integrations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faisal. That's also a very, very important point. And I think I would add also to it the need to have statistical expertise when processing this data and knowing how to process it and to analyze it in a way that doesn't have any biases and that is comparable across within the regions and also within the country and also across countries as well. And then also, so originally we identified the one need on more up-to-date data, and the other need we had was on the measuring the sustainability side of tourism. What do you think are the main challenges in measuring the sustainability? I mean, I think we already seen from Mr. Faisal as well on the experience in Saudi Arabia, but maybe we can focus now on the main challenges that countries or the regional level we can find in measuring this, both at the economic, social, and environmental dimension of tourism.
The most challenge of measuring these kind of data is the data quality. The data quality, we find some issue. Let's say if I am talking about guests in-house in commercial accommodation, and if I go to the survey about how many number of visitors they are staying in the commercial accommodation, these kind of the data quality. Imagine if you go to the something, it's not what's called intangible, let's say like gas emission, or how to measure the coastal area, these stuff. It's this kind of challenge actually, but with using big data and put effort in data science people, scientists to analyze these data, it's very important for that.
As a regional level, I think the main one of the main challenges is limitation of data related to tourism sustainability. And also, I think measuring sustainability is a bit high cost. compared to the limited budget for measuring tourism sustainability. And I'm not sure if there is, a practice on measuring sustainability. I mean, maybe there is also a limited number of successful best practice in measuring sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Suad. Indeed, it's something that is that has emerged in the last few years, and it's gaining importance. So these kind of pioneering pilot studies, such as the one that Saudi Arabia carried, can provide great examples for other countries to also take on and start implementing this type of measurements as well. We are, like I mentioned before, we have within the MST, we have about 12 countries that have measured sustainability at some level. Of course, this is, like I mentioned before, a modular approach. So they focus on specific questions that they want to reply to, and they focus on gathering the data that is needed to reply to that specific question. So this is indeed, we hope to have more pilot studies as well on this, who can also, so if there are countries in the region that would have specific questions related to sustainable tourism, and they want to gather the data for it, we're always open to discuss and to see how we can support them on this as well. Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I don't know if Ms. Suad or Mr. Faisal have any final remarks to do. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Thank you so much for this webinar. That it's even for me, I learn from the presentation of the panelists and the questions that it shows in my screen from the attendance of this webinar. Thank you so much. I don't have anything.
Thank you, Hernan. Really, it was a good idea to. It is. We benefit a lot from this webinar, and thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Basma, as well for taking the initiative on this webinar as well, for organizing it. Again, I think the main both of you, Mr. Faisal and Ms. Suad, are the main stars of the webinar. You're the ones who we wanted to. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to have the webinar. So thank you very much for participating. I think I'll pass it on now to Basma. Again, thank you very much, Basma, for organizing this. It's been a pleasure, as usual. And I'll pass it on to you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hernan, also for making this happen. And thank you for Ms. Suad and Faisal. I agree with also what Mr. Faisal said. The quality of data is what matters. The quality of the figures that we're sharing with the world is what matters. I also would like to thank Ms. Suad and the Statistics Center in the GCC, our main, our very good partner in statistics in the region, who are aligned also with many things that the UNWTO is working on in figures. We highly appreciate this work, and they are an integral part of our work in the region when it comes to statistics. Also, I know that you explained MST, and also Saudi Arabia, the Saudi representative also shared Saudi Arabia's experience in the pilot study. I would like to also re-invite all our member states in the Middle East to join us in MST. We're there to work with you. We're there to make it happen. Ernan and his team are ready to answer any of your questions, how to start with it. And we're there for you 24/7, anytime. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you soon in other webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Basma. Thank you. Bye-bye.